Hello, everybody. This is Pamela Fagan Hutchins with Wine, Women, and Writing, and this is a show where I talk with other writers about their books. And specifically, the thing I love to talk to them about is their female characters and where they get the inspiration from them, how they layer them, make them complex. And that means I'm usually talking to female writers, which is what we're going to do today. But first, PamelaFaganHutchins.com. That's my website. And you can get to the podcast page by going to Wine, Women, and Writing. When you get there, you can sign up for the show to be delivered free to your RSS device of choice. Free is a good price. And you'll get a weekly dive into some authors' fantastic works. You can also support the show when you're there. So if you want to hit that link and do it, it's not going to hurt my feelings, nor will it hurt my feelings if you also look at my books. But like I said, today's not about me. Today's about my guest. And I want to introduce to you Susanna, and it's Calkins, right?
Yeah, Calkins.
Right? Calkins with a C. I wanted to make her like me with an H, Hutchins. But Susanna Calkins. Now, the funny story about us sitting down today is that last night, no surprise, because we're at BoucherCon, which is a mystery convention for authors, people in the industry, and for fans. There's some drinking that goes on
just a little
at these events. Just
it
a
happens,
little.
I think.
And so last night we met in the bar for some of our mutual friends, and this morning we said, okay, we'll sit down and talk. And so we're doing that. Mm-hmm. But this is a very quick acquaintance. Uh-huh. I did go and stalk your books a little bit a minute ago.
Okay,
so
thank
super.
you.
And she writes historical mystery. So we're going to hear it from Susanna about what she does and how she does it. So tell us about the series that you have out right now, whatever you're currently doing.
Yeah, so I have two series. So I have a series that's Lucy Campion Historical Mysteries. These are set in 17th century London, time of the plague and the fire. 666 is the Devil's Year, so 1666.
Ooh.
And there's 4 in that series. I have a 5th I'm working on right now.
Oh, excellent.
And my other series is set in 1929 Chicago, Prohibition era. It's set in a speakeasy. I have my Gina Ricci is the protagonist. She's a flapper. And the first book, Murder Knocks Twice, starts with her first day on the job, starting cigarette selling and trying to figure out what it means to even work in a speakeasy.
And so you're kind of having to divide your brain in half and alternate books in the series. Mm-hmm. Is that fun for you, or is it painfully difficult, or both?
Yeah, I did have some time between the end of my Lucy Campion Mysteries. I had about a year or so when I started working on the 1920s books, and so actually I was able to kind of put myself in, so of course I do research, and I'm a historian by training, but I found started drinking like cocktails, and I had this list of 100 Prohibition era cocktails. I was like, I'm going to try them all before the book comes out, and it's gonna help me as I write. And I got to like 35, and then I hit ones with absinthe and like egg flip, and I was like, these are disgusting. And I listened to a lot of like 20s music, so actually it wasn't so hard to get into the series. And then I worked on those books, and then I started working on my 5th Lucy again, so it wasn't so hard actually to jump back into Lucy, but it was a little less. I had to like drink ale and listen to madrigals, which was a little bit of
not
flip.
Not as much fun.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I love that you use things that relate you and ground you in the eras to pull yourself into voice and character for your books.
Yeah.
So do you ever? I literally have done this. It's just why I ask. Do you dress the part? Do you ever, do other things like tactilely pull yourself in?
Yeah, not so much with Lucy, although people saw the cover of my book, they thought, people asked me, is that you? I'm like, no, I'm not on the cover of my book, although that would be kind of interesting, just as a servant, 17th century servant. But my new series, when I had the book launch, I did I had my book launch in a speakeasy, and I dressed as a flapper, and I had a special drink called the Hotsy Totsy, and it was Bourbon Ricky, and it was fun. That was like the most tactile I would say I got, but it's fun. I was going to do that for Halloween, but it just it was a little cold where we are, so
it was. It's shockingly cold for this early in the fall for Dallas.
Yeah.
It's not normal.
No.
Have you been to Dallas before?
Yes, but it was always. I thought, because I came out of Chicago. Dallas is going to be so warm. It was not warm.
When it's raining and cold, it was bitter. So
bitter.
Cold.
Yeah.
But I gotta say,
warm-hearted city.
Oh, so that's nice. Yeah, it is. People are nice here. Well, my experience with Chicago is that wet, cold with wind
Yeah.
in Chicago is the worst, but beautiful.
Yeah,
I love Chicago.
Yeah, no, it's a great city. I mean, they don't joke about the wind. It's a real thing.
Yeah, and I grew up in Amarillo, so wind is not something I'm scared of, and I live in Wyoming, which is basically it's a wind tunnel. That's what Wyoming is. But coming off that lake, coming off that lake, it puts religion in you. Woo! And so you're writing now about your hometown historically. Is that fun for you to be able to be where it's happening, even though it was long ago?
Yeah, I mean, so I actually grew up in Philadelphia, so not my true hometown, but I'm a transplant Chicagoan. But when I first moved to Chicago, that was the thing I realized is like how, and I was still working on my Lucy books, but how dominant Prohibition really was and still is today. I mean, I would meet people and they would say like, this used to be a speakeasy, or my grandmother used to make gin in that building there, or my great aunt was a rum runner off of Lake Michigan. And then I met someone when I started writing the books. Then these stories, they're always coming in about Prohibition and secretive, illicit trade. Their family members. But I met someone who said my great uncle was one of the men who was mowed down in the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. Which happened in 1929 Chicago, and I write about that in my book. I was like, wow, it's still lived. I mean, like my other books don't have the same lived now. They don't feel as lived. They're 350 years ago. So, but the Chicago Prohibition, it's
there's still people alive with the stories, unlike with the Lucy books.
And even yesterday, I did a panel here, and someone in Dallas was telling me about like how they used to live in Iowa, and there was all this, speakeasies that they had, and they were part of illicit trade. So it's very lived still for a lot of people. Yeah,
I was talking with a World War II writer, and she said one of the things, she used to write ancient Rome, historical fiction, and she was, I think it was Kate Quinn, and she was saying that it was really cool and different to be writing about things that were still within people's memories, because it had such an emotional impact on them. I love reading historicals and reading further back in time, but there's just something about that.
Well, someone showed me a nice picture of, it was of her like grandmother and her friends, and they were sitting at what looked like a drugstore counter, and on the back of it says, "We were drinking margaritas," and I just love that. But it looked like they were drinking like ice cream sodas, But I just love that she wanted to make sure that it was clear, like we were sneaking a margarita. Because those were the people that didn't go to speakeasies. Like older ladies would go to tea rooms, and they would have, rum added to, or to their hot chocolate, or they could get some gin, but they weren't going to go to a speakeasy to get their alcohol.
They were far, too classy for that.
Exactly. Yeah, and they just want a little dollop, as one does.
Absolutely. And again, that's what we're doing here at Balshicon. And we have a train going by outside. It's been fun to do these live shows for you guys because, they're not going to air live, but we're recording them live. Catch as catch can, if you will. If all the mystery writers are here, why not talk to them while we're face to face?
Exactly.
But that does lead to things like we've had some authors come in and want to join the conversation for some other shows or the DART train going by, but we roll with it. We roll with it. Okay, so if you had to pick a favorite child out of your books, is it the Lucy books or is it the Speakeasy era books?
I mean, I do think there's something about your first book. A Murder at Roseman's Gate did come out of my research that I had done when I was working on my PhD. It was all around murder ballads and how people used to sing about murder. And I ended up, that book was, so I only thought I was ever going to write that one book. And then they're like, well, we'd like a series. So I think there's always going to be that book is what made me a writer. So I will probably always love it the most in some ways. But my speakeasies are so fun. I love writing them. So to me, it's just super fun to do.
They're almost like a guilty pleasure.
Yeah. I enjoy it. And they're a little different. They're a little lighter in tone than my other ones, but my other ones are not heavy historical. But they're. I try to be authentic and accurate, because that's the historian part of me. But I try to make them. They're not. But the speakeasy ones are much lighter in tone, I would say.
Is there ever a point at which you say enough research now? Enough. Or are you always
enough
thinking
cocktails? Yes.
Only with the cocktails.
Yes. There are points where I'm like, I've had enough cocktails.
But I find that historical fiction writers, historical mystery writers, is being part of that whole genre, the greater historical space, that the history can consume you, the research can consume you, and it's fun to meet mystery writers in this space because you have to deliver a plot, which means you have to get moving on these, and that can be hard because the research is fun.
Yeah, I enjoy it, but I mean, I do teach history too, so in some ways I kind of I already have some of the big thing, I'm not saying I know, but I know some of the bigger trends and stuff, so I do have to look up a lot of the daily life, but I call it TV work, so my kids might be watching TV, and this is what I call writing adjacent, so this is when I look up things, what did a 1929 ladies' room look like, what did, so I just look up this kind of stuff. How did they use a phone in 1929? Literally, that's not as obvious as you think.
Right.
And so I spend time, so I often will just put little brackets in my writing, put description in here later, look this up, and that's what I do. So I try not to be in the rabbit hole so much, because to me it's if I can't use it in my writing, then I'm not gonna,
It's such an enemy to forward progress. I'm writing historical right now, and there's a whole lot of look this shit up, because otherwise you go down those happy little trails. And so I can totally see that. But how cool that you had this interest in mystery and fiction, that you could use what you already knew, a world that was already real and alive in your mind. Have you always been someone that was fascinated with the past and things that were old, so to speak?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I'm definitely one of those people even when I go to a city or when I see a street sign, I'm always I wonder where that name come from. Everywhere I go, I'm where did that name, where did that building, So I think I've always been, and I did historical fiction when I was a kid. But, I didn't come into in college I became a history major, but I was a biology major first. I don't know.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was a mistake. But I think and the creativity kind of got beat out of me in college and grad school, but it kind of came back to me as I mentioned these murder ballads and
that murder ballad thing. I mean, totally blows me away. No idea about that. And now I want to go read Lucy. So tell us about Lucy and how you came up with the character that fits in within your historical world.
Yeah. So and I will just say something about these murder ballads. So I would read these stories and over and people really did sing about murder. It was this is the penny press. So it's kind of like the National Enquirer or a tabloids today. It's half true, half sensationalized. But this is where people got their news. True news is what it was. And because people weren't always literate, they would sing these stories or read them to other people. And they would paste these gruesome pictures up on the wall because that was what people could afford,
Right.
They didn't have portraits and things like that. But I would see the same story over and over repeated of a young woman who had been found strangled or stabbed. And in her pocket there was always a note. And it would say something like, "Dear sweetheart, meet me at this secluded glen at midnight. Don't tell anyone." And it would say, "Your sweetheart." And it would say JR or P or OJ or Q, and then the community, because there's no police force, the community would say they would find this body, find this note, and they would say, "Hey, we know who that is," and they would go round up this guy, throw him in Newgate prison, which was this terrible prison, and he would languish there, and then eventually he would be brought to trial and found guilty, because back then people had to be proved guilty, they had to be proved innocent. You're assumed guilty, and then usually he'd be hanged. And so I always thought, well, who was this man? Was he framed for this murder? Who was this woman? Why was she killed? Why did she meet him? Why did she get this note and go? And so that became the story of my first book. And Lucy, who is she's in this book. She's a chambermaid, and it's her friend another chambermaid who's murdered. So she's not very literate. She has to figure out how. And then someone she loves is accused of this murder, and so he's facing hanging. So it's to me, it's how could regular people who are not necessarily literate figure out a way to solve a crime?
Yeah, and and putting her in a situation where there's not the resources to help her, and that she's eventually has to come up with the wherewithal.
Right.
So she's uneducated, she's untrained in this, but she cares a lot about it, and so ultimately I guess you find a way for her to keep finding dead bodies or to keep getting invested.
Well, actually it's not a problem in London, as it's not a problem in Chicago, but London for sure. This is the time literally of the plague and the fire and the Great Fire of London, and it was not surprising to have a lot of deaths everywhere. And so back then natural causes could be all kinds of things, and so they didn't have the kind of knowledge we have today. So unless someone was like stabbed, or
obviously,
even poisons they didn't necessarily know. So it was very easy to have murders happening all over the place in London. The next book, I won't say too much about it, but my first book ends with London in fire, in flames. And then the next book, From the Charred Remains, which I hadn't known I was going to write. I was like, I got to figure out what happens after the fire. I do have, basically, they're all of London is helping cleaning up this fire, because it's a disaster. So they're throwing dirt into the Thames. They're trying to stop the chars, And I have a barrel, like some, how after a fire some things still stay, like you're like, how is that possible?
Yeah, this one random shoe or something.
Yeah. And so I have an old pub, the Cheshire Cheese, which is a real pub in London now. It was recreated in 1667. I have it that there was a barrel, and there was a body in there, and there's questions about who this body is, and she finds it. Lucy finds it. So dead bodies are everywhere.
And for mystery writers, that's very convenient.
Right.
Yeah.
And it wasn't like a teeny town, where it's really hard to have like the Jessica Fletcher finding more and more bodies.
Like, how is there any people left in this town?
But London and Chicago, like murders there, it's not even a question that there could be tons of them.
Especially when you think back to the, those eras, or Prohibition in Chicago, those eras with all the mobsters and the lawlessness. And basically you make something that people really want illegal, and bad things start to happen.
And it was bad. I mean, the alcohol itself was quite bad. And so there were thousands of alcohol deaths every year in Prohibition. In Chicago alone, there were, hundreds and hundreds of alcohol-related deaths. So it's like, that's not that. And so, my next book pretty much has a poisoning in it, because how could you not have a poisoning?
Yeah. It's so much fun. Research plus getting to figure out how to kill people.
Yeah.
It's just,
what's more fun than that?
It's just so much fun. So did you ever really picture yourself as a mystery novelist, or was that just kind of an accident that came out of your research and your fascination with the era?
Yeah, it was pretty much an accident. I was someone that wrote a lot when I was a kid. I wrote a lot of short stories, so I kind of always felt like I was a writer in some ways. But yeah, it wasn't until I was in grad school also where I started reading some of Anne Perry and Charles Todd, who I was just chatting with. It's kind of delightful to meet these people later in life. And I was reading them, and I thought, there was this moment where I was like, well, maybe I can do this.
Yeah.
I can do this, maybe. And I still was in grad school, and then but it wasn't, but there was this moment. Unfortunately, my son broke his leg when he was 2, and I was assistant professor of history at the time, and I had to stay home from work, and I was staying with him.
Oh, yeah.
And, but I was doing Thomas Trains, and with one hand, building blocks on one hand, and I was finishing this novel with my other hand. And I told my husband, I always say, this is the only secret I kept from my husband. 10 years I've been working on this book, and I said to him, I think I've written a book. And so he was really excited. It was on and off for 10 years I was working on this, because I was like, I don't know if it's a book, it's not a book. And I thought I was writing one novel, and then like I said, they gave me a contract for 2, and I was like, what?
This is a problem. The first one took 10 years.
What? Oh, yeah. Oh, no, they got so much faster. Because that was just because I was like, write a scene. I was just like, I wasn't really being structured about it.
Right.
And I did a lot of rewriting. In fact, I had written 200 pages of this book without knowing who the murderer was, which, is always a problem.
It is a problem. And I would imagine you don't do that anymore since you're on schedules as much.
Yeah.
Or sometimes they'll change. It's
Yeah.
like, I think I know. I just wrote one where I had no idea what was going to happen. It's freeing.
Yeah. I was more interested in I still am, the impact of the murder on the community. I'm not always, but now I've learned I need to at least, where I'm still probably a pop pantser, but I like to know why the murderer did it and why that victim, what's the motivation, why. And
you're a little bit of an anthropologist. You're a little bit of a sociologist as well as a researcher.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Well, because I've learned otherwise when you have to work it backwards, you have the person but you don't know why they did it. That actually is really challenging to build motivation in. Mm-hmm. So it's so much easier to kind of know that from the first place.
Yeah, it is. And yet sometimes it's really hard because you have to see where the characters go.
Right. Exactly.
And like you say, it's within a community. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of different impacts.
Exactly.
So you think your authors have it all figured out, but sometimes we're wandering in the wilderness with you up until the last page and we go, oh, eureka. yeah, that's who did it. They just told me. I got to go back and rewrite the whole thing.
Right.
Well, it's been so much fun
Yeah,
talking
it's
to you.
great. Thank you so
I'm glad you
much.
were able to sit down with me.
Yeah,
and
this was really fun.
you guys, thanks for tuning in, and you really should go give these books a look. This is Susanna Calkins, not with an H, even though I wanted to make it that earlier. And you can check out our Lucy Campion series or the Speakeasy Prohibitionary series, the Speakeasy Murders. And while you're on the internet, go out to PamelaFaganHutchins.com, the Wine Women in Writing page, and be sure you sign up to get the podcast. But even more, I list the shows before they're going to air, so it gives you a chance to get their books and read them, which hopefully you've done before this one aired. But if not, get ready for the next ones, and let's book club together. This has been a solely owned and copyrighted production of Authors on the Air Global Radio Network, which I always forget to say till the last second, and with many, many thanks, and big kisses to Pam Stack, our producer, who makes these conversations between authors about the books you love to read possible. Thanks, you guys.
Thanks. Bye.